Those are our seats?
You mean these were your seats?
No, that's not what he means.
Now listen up. These are our seats now, and there ain't a damn thing you can do about it. So why don't you and Super Engine there find yourself someplace else to have a powwow?
Okay.
Come on, y'all boys, just sit down so we can...
Native Americans are almost invisible to settlers. Colonialism has essentially erased their existence and culture in the United States, and most white settlers envision Native Americans as some ancient people living far off in the past. If they do acknowledge that they still exist, they either have no knowledge of the sorts of struggles they face on and off the reservation, or somehow justify colonialism by pointing out all the quote-unquote benefits of modernization that white settlers have given them. But Native Americans are very much still living today, on reservations and in cities across the country. They're making themselves heard, revitalizing the culture that white settlers try to destroy, and will continue to gain back all the land and the recognition that these people deserve. Today, we will explore one such movement that was so inspirational to so many indigenous people in the United States and across the world, the American Indian Movement. The organization announced that yes, Native Americans are still here and the problems they face will be addressed. The problems that I will discuss in depth are continuing to this day, as they have been since white Europeans first arrived in the Americas. The American Indian Movement is a continuation of 500 years of struggle, but for the sake of brevity, we will start with how AIM came to be. In 1944, the Pick-Sloan Plan was implemented by the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation in order to divert the Missouri River and connected rivers towards arid land that would improve the conditions for farming. The consequence of this diversion was that tribal lands were flooded. People lost their homes, livestock, farmland, and their land that was supposed to be protected by the federal government. The U.S. government displaced 750,000 Native Americans, with only very slim compensations given to each family, and were forcefully bused to cities like Los Angeles, Denver, San Francisco, Chicago, and Minneapolis. This process of dislocation and dispossession is known as termination, rather genocide. Many tribes fought in court to stop this ethnic cleansing, but many laws were already being passed throughout the 1950s to give legal precedent of controlling the Native Americans. Such as in 1953, House Concurrent Resolution 108, which called the immediate termination of the Flathead, Klamath, Menominee, Potawatomi, and Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribes, which led to the privatization of millions of acres, or Public Law 280, which put all criminal and civil jurisdiction of reservations in the hands of the states. None of this prevented indigenous Americans from coming together and resisting these genocidal acts against their peoples, and this would be especially apparent during the 1960s and 70s with an indigenous movement known as Red Power. This movement had its origins in the 1950s with the National Congress of American Indians. The NCAI were also rallying with the government for furthering the spread of American patriotism and anti-communism via their proposed plans for Native American welfare. They also did not promote any form of sovereignty on reservations, as this was seen as being antithetical to gaining government protections. But all this was soon to be subject to change by the organization's youngest members. In 1961, after a conference in Chicago in which the younger members of the NCAI denounced the organization's conservative leanings, the National Indian Youth Council was founded in Gallup, New Mexico. They were made up of the likes of Clyde Warrior and Jeanette McLeod, and they used tactics such as sit-ins, occupations, direct action, as well as utilizing the legal system. The NIYC is most famous for supporting the Fish-ins, which were the protests in the Pacific Northwest for treaty rights, and many were beaten, some even killed, by state officials and white thugs. They are also the ones to coin Red Power. Through the 60s, NIYC and many other tribal protest organizations sprang up, struggling for Native sovereignty and recognition. The most famous action in which most of these groups came together was at Alcatraz Island in San Francisco in 1969. This was a massive gathering of indigenous people from across the nation. It was organized by Shoshone Bannock Leonard Peltier and Mohawk Richard Oakes. They demanded the island be turned into an all-Indian university and to reclaim the land that belonged to the Ohlone. Hundreds of Native American activists visited the occupation, which lasted for 19 months before President Richard Nixon and Governor Ronald Reagan sent state troops to force them off Alcatraz. Their demands were not met, but this would only invigorate the Red Power movement. Out of this climate came the American Indian Movement. AIM was founded in 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they were first focused on the urban plights that indigenous peoples faced in the cities. They started out as neighborhood patrols in order to monitor police harassment of Native Americans, similar to the Black Panthers. Then they expanded to creating survival programs, such as the survival schools that were created to address the high dropout rate and discrimination among indigenous children. These schools were mainly run by women, some of whom were parents, and they taught the children the true history of their peoples and the United States, as well as having an entire K-12 curriculum all run by the community. These schools were so successful that the Department of Education offered to fund them, but they rejected the proposal. As the We Will Remember Survival School stated in a collective document, if we are to learn the truth about the history of the Lakota since the start of colonization and its results called genocide, we must maintain our independence. To learn the true meaning of Native American sovereignty, we must have full control of what our young peoples are taught. Through the 1970s, there were 16 survival schools in cities and reservations across the country. AIM also created legal help for parents whose children were incarcerated or who were removed from their homes and placed into white families, which are still issues Native Americans face today. AIM also took more radical actions that were similar to that of the NIYC. In 1970, AIM united Native Americans and Lakotas occupied Mount Rushmore in order to help spread what was stated in the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, and to shout from the mountaintops that this land was stolen. They said that each president of the monument helped commit genocide against their people. Again, activists were forced off the area by state authorities, and the momentum kept building. One of the biggest protests that involved thousands of Native Americans in the history of the United States was the Trail of Broken Treaties. In 1972, AIM, NIYC, the Canadian National Indian Brotherhood, and 5 other groups organized a massive march on Washington, and they took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs headquarters. The march's purpose was to disrupt the presidential election in order to bring attention to rights stated in the Native American treaties. They created a document known as the 20 Points, with the main focus around the first point, restoration of constitutional treaty-making authority. This would force federal recognition of each Indian nation's sovereignty. Government officials stated that they will look into it, but no actions were taken. The occupation lasted from November 3rd to the 9th, with hundreds of Native Americans arrested upon their return to their homes. This is where the FBI stepped in. The FBI already had some undercover agents among the treaty protests and tried to encourage them to destroy as much property as possible. While some property was destroyed, what really made the FBI go after AIM was that several secret documents were stolen from the Bureau, which contained information on leasing reservation land to private interests. One of the trail leaders, Lakota Hank Adams, volunteered to recover the documents, as there were already copies given to specific tribes. In the process of returning the documents, he was arrested. The FBI helped encourage more arrests on returning activists, as an FEI document recommends local police put AIM leaders under close scrutiny and arrest them on every possible charge until they can no longer make bail. Such was the case for AIM activist Leonard Peltier upon returning to Milwaukee. He was beaten severely by 2 off-duty police officers and was charged for attempted murder of one of the officers. Fortunately, Peltier was acquitted. Not only was the FBI escalating violence against Native Americans, but so was the violence around white towns that bordered reservations. Much of this was already happening in January 1972, when Aguala Raymond Yellow Thunder was found dead in Gordon, Nebraska, which bordered the Pine Ridge Reservation. He was stripped naked, beaten, and tortured. The perpetrators were 4 white men, Melvin and Leslie Hare, Bernard Lutter, and Robert Bayless. Yellow Thunder's family requested AIM to investigate the murder, as they feared the police would simply disregard the murder entirely, a common practice in border towns, even today. 1,000 AIM members were able to get the Hare brothers charged with manslaughter and sentenced to prison and some justice for the Aguala people. This caused AIM membership to soar, and Native Americans across the country began to heavily respect them. The FBI was taking note as well, as one document ordered to monitor AIM and related militant Indian nationalist organizations. The beginning of this repression is exemplified with the arrest of Aguala AIM activist Russell Means, who was arrested in Scottsbluff, Nebraska for participating in the Chicano Indian Unity Conference. On the night of January 14th, police entered Means' cell and placed a gun on the floor and told him to make a run for it. Recounting the incident, Means said, "They wanted to off me during the escape attempt." The FBI was aware of the situation, as their documents show, and of course, did absolutely nothing about it. Other documents show that the conference was under heavy surveillance and had undercover agents attending. On June 9, 1972, a dam bursted near Rapid City, South Dakota, and flooded the entire town. It took away 1,300 homes, 5,000 vehicles, and 238 lives, 14% of which were Native American. Many Native Americans were displaced. The city received $160 million in disaster relief, which was divided by race and class. As Liberal Democrat mayor of the city, Don Bartlett, put it, "That doesn't mean we just divvied up the money equally all around. The Indian who lost a shack and a few sticks of furniture didn't get as much as somebody who lost a $40,000 house with 25 years of accumulated possessions." Many natives left for the reservations, which made them ineligible for relief, and those that stayed were put into a National Guard camp called Camp Rapid. While white residents were able to stay in gyms and churches, hundreds of Native Americans were forced to stay inside a concentration camp. National Guardsmen kept constant surveillance on every Native American, such as their trailers being floodlighted at night. It was months before any of them saw compensation housing, for after white residents were already rehoused. When they were, Native Americans were put in housing projects that were put outside the city limits, segregating them from the majority white town. This segmentation only increased police attacks on Native Americans. In January 1973, Wesley Badhart Bull was murdered by a white man in nearby Custer. 200 AIM activists tried to get into the courthouse in order to demand murder charges be brought against the murderer, but were blocked off by the police. A violent confrontation broke out, with armed policemen beating whoever was in the vicinity. Police cruisers were set on fire, and many were taken to jail. AIM then began a campaign in Rapid City, starting with activists crowding bars in order to protect resident Native Americans for being harassed by the police and white vigilantes. On February 3rd, 200 AIM members stormed a meeting of the Racial Reconciliation Commission to demand equal housing, more Native police officers, and Native attorney, or AIM would declare war on every town in the Black Hills, as Dennis Banks put it. The committee agreed to meet to discuss with AIM members, but this only happened occasionally. AIM hit the streets, demonstrating for several nights, which led to riot cops being called in, and of course, they attacked and arrested AIM. Even Mayor Bartlett showed up with cops at motels to drive out any AIM members out of town. Wealthy whites in that town would never forget those nights, knowing their claims to land was on a very shaky foundation. During that same month, the famous occupation of Wounded Knee took place. The occupation was in response to the iron fist of the elected tribal councilman of the Pine Ridge Reservation, Dick Wilson. Wilson was a classic despot, as he was heavily supported by the Bureau of Indian Affairs with a $62,000 grant, which he mostly gave to his relatives that he employed in the Bureau, to himself, and to his own private army called the Guardians of the Aguala Nation, or Goons for short. He banned any and all political gatherings, including AIM membership on the reservation. In cases where tribal members complained publicly, the Goons would forcefully remove them, but the tribe would not stand for it, and they met at Calico Hall to figure out what to do with the tyrant. They requested the help of Russell Means to negotiate with Dick Wilson, but when he arrived at the meeting spot, he was brutally beaten by the Goons. The Aguala people now had to do something drastic. Elders Glasset Bissonet and Ellen Moves Camp told AIM members how it was mostly the women and elders who stood up to Dick Wilson, and they asked, "Where are our men? Where are our defenders?" With this, Fool's Crow encouraged Russell Means to take warriors to Wounded Knee, the site of the 1890 Wounded Knee massacre by the U.S. 7th Cavalry, and where the Great Sitting Bull was murdered. AIM would occupy a local church there and coordinated it with the press to host a news conference there. Activists were already occupying the area when on the day of the press conference they found the roads blocked by goons, federal marshals, and FBI units. According to Pentagon documents, they brought with them 17 armored personnel carriers, 130,000 rounds of M16 ammunition, 40,000 rounds of M40 high explosives, as well as helicopters and phantom jets on standby. Much more was being sent in by the FBI. All AIM brought with them were a couple of hunting rifles, and one Vietnam veteran brought a Chinese AK-47 with a single clip, but most were unarmed. Many other participants included hundreds of other Native Americans from across the country, black civil rights activists, white leftists, on-the-ground reporters, and news coverage from all around the world, from countries as far as the Soviet Union. All of them would find themselves pinned down by the attacking US forces. AIM shot back, and an ongoing firefight ensued. 2 Native Americans died, and 14 wounded. 12 people disappeared, speculated to have been captured and murdered by goons buried somewhere on the reservation. Much of the reason why US forces fired at the church was in part due to goons attempting to kill AIM members, resulting in AIM retaliating, as well as miscommunication issues between the FBI and US Marshals. Overall, 1 million rounds of ammunition were fired into the church over the 71-day occupation. The worst was yet to come. 592 arrests were made of people suspected to have been involved in the occupation. The staggering number of court cases sunk any and all funding that AIM had and almost destroyed the group. Worse was that Dick Wilson was out for blood, and he put the people of the Pine Ridge Reservation through what the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights described as a reign of terror. Working in tandem with the FBI and Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Goon Death Squad intimidated, murdered, firebombed anyone and everyone who stood in Wilson's way. From 1973 to 1976, Pine Ridge had the highest murder rate in the nation, 170 per 100,000. 342 people were victims of physical assault, and 60 plus people were murdered. Many of these murder cases still go unsolved to this very day. The FBI threatened the lives of AIM's most prominent activists. One of them was activist Anna Mae Aquash. Aquash was a Mi'kmaq from Nova Scotia, and later moved to Boston in the late 60s. She was involved in almost all these significant events mentioned, excluding Alcatraz and Rushmore, and an important link between AIM and First Nations people in Canada. She was very close to AIM leaders Dennis Banks and Leonard Peltier, and was a very prominent leader in her own right. By the mid-70s, however, rumors began to circulate she was an FBI informant, no doubt contrived by the FBI itself as part of their counterintelligence program. She went missing on December 11, 1975, and was found dead by a farmer on February 24th, near the Pine Ridge Reservation. The FBI came to investigate the scene, including Special Agent David Price, who threatened her that she would wind up dead a few months before. The Bureau of Indian Affairs conducted an autopsy on her and concluded she died from exposure due to frost. At the request of the FBI, her hands were cut off and sent to the FBI lab to identify the body as she was buried as a Jane Doe. Why the FBI did this is still uncertain. Aquash's family wasn't buying the official story and requested a second autopsy. Her body was exhumed and the examiner found that she did not die from exposure at all, but from a slug that was found in the back of her skull. The examiner concluded she died by execution from a rifle. For decades, some suspected that AIM members were themselves responsible for the murder because they feared she was an informant. In 2004 and 2010, Arlo Looking Cloud and John Graham were convicted for her murder, but there was still much controversy around her death and the FBI's role in it. The horrific circumstances surrounding Anna Mae Aquash's murder spelled doom for another prominent activist, Leonard Peltier. Peltier was a part of the Chippewa tribe and was an indigenous rights activist for years before AIM formed. He joined AIM in 1972 and was a participant of the Trails of Broken Treaties and Wounded Knee. After Wounded Knee, the FBI declared him a fugitive and a high-priority target. Peltier was in Pine Ridge with other AIM activists, setting up a defensive encampment for elders Harry and Cecilia Jumping Bull, who were outspoken critics of the Wilson regime. On June 26, Agent Ronald Williams and Jack Kohler had an arrest warrant for Jimmy Eagle for the theft of cowboy boots. They immediately exited their cars and began firing at the camp. AIM returned fire, believing it to be a goon assault. Both agents were shot and Williams radioed for backup. 2 BIA officers were on the way to the compound, but their vehicle was assaulted by 3 Navajo teenagers with hunting rifles who just so happened to be picnicking near the road. The BIA officers retreated, and the agents died. The goons and a SWAT team were called into the camp, but the place was abandoned as soon as they arrived. The FBI initiated a Vietnam-level invasion of the reservation. A combined force of the FBI, goons, federal marshals, and 180 specially trained SWAT, all outfitted in Vietnam jungle fatigues, conducted a military-style occupation of Pine Ridge. They were equipped with M16 assault rifles, M14 sniper rifles, M79 grenade launchers, plastic explosives, Bell UH-1B Huey helicopters, fixed-wing Bird Dog spotter planes, jeeps, armored personnel carriers, Army-supplied communications gear, and tracking dogs. Everywhere they patrolled, they broke into homes of the tribespeople and raided their possessions. They killed an elderly James Bringsiello by giving him a heart attack when FBI kicked his door down and drew their weapons on him. Air assaults by helicopter rained down on Ames Sylvester Cello Black Crow. This all lasted for 3 months. The people were fed up and launched a petition for the FBI to be kicked off the reservation, and the Tribal Council supported it. The chairman of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, Arthur J. Fleming, had said this was an overreaction which takes on aspects of a vendetta, a full-scale military-type invasion. The presence of such a massive force has created a deep resentment on the part of many reservation residents who feel that such a procedure would not be tolerated in any non-Indian community in the United States. They point out that little has been done to solve numerous murders on the reservation, but when 2 white men are killed, troops are brought in from all over the country at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. Peltier had managed to escape to Canada, and the FBI did everything in their power to extradite him. Primarily this was done through terrorizing a mentally ill Aguala woman, Myrtle Poorbear. Agents David Price and William Wood arrested Poorbear on false charges and imprisoned her in motels in Gordon, Nebraska and Sturgis, South Dakota for a month. Poorbear had said that Price showed her morgue photos of Aquash's body, and that if she didn't confess that she witnessed Peltier kill the agents at the Jumpy Bull compound, she would end up just like her. They also said that they could get away with killing because they were agents. She signed their affidavit that she was indeed a witness. Poorbear would later say that she had no connection at all with Peltier, nor that she even was at the compound. With that, the Canadian government arrested Peltier and handed him over to the US government. Since Peltier's imprisonment, former FBI officials and federal prosecutors and human rights organizations like Amnesty International have found faults within Peltier's case. One of them was glaring, being that the FBI claimed that Peltier used an AR-15 to kill the agents, but their own ballistics report showed that the found AR-15 wasn't fired, nor did the cartridge cage even match Peltier's weapon. Peltier admitted that he did shoot at the agents, but did not kill them. Peltier was charged with 2 life sentences and is currently imprisoned in Coleman, Florida. Despite everything, AIM lived on. While the FBI certainly did everything to destroy AIM, their biggest mistake was going after men. The women of AIM remained mostly untouched and continued to fulfill the connections made with Native American communities. In 1977, Women of All Red Nations, or WARN, was first started by Thunderhawk, Young, Ballinger, Lorelei Decorah Means, Agnes Williams, Lakota Hardin, and Jeanette McLeod, and they took on colonial struggles that affected Native American women in particular, such as forced sterilization, malnutrition among young children, and the high levels of domestic violence and abuse. In 1980, they created the Black Hills Alliance that created a coalition of white people to townships that were affected by uranium mining. The protest attracted 11,000 people, and they were able to halt the mining operation. They continued building on a coalition of the Yellow Thunder Camp, in which they attempted to reclaim the Black Hills under the Fort Laramie Treaty, and they had success in gaining support of the white working class, such as a gold miners' union. AIM has also had much success internationally with the establishment of the International Indian Treaty Council in 1974. They made connections with anti-colonial movements all over the world, such as organizations in Ireland and Palestine, the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, and the Zapatistas in Mexico. In 2007, the United States accepted their Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which is also the 20 points that was originally written for the US government during the Trail of Broken Treaties. AIM's story is one of sheer determination and loss. it demonstrated that the genocidal campaigns that commenced during the Indian Wars of the late 19th century had never really disappeared. The forces of the FBI and the United States government brutalized and murdered indigenous peoples even when the whole world was watching. AIM and the people they served suffered immensely, as Dennis Banks put it. The FBI's tactics eventually proved successful in a peculiar sort of way. It's remarkable under the circumstances, and a real testament to the inner strength of the traditional Gualas, that the feds were never really able to divide them from us, to have the traditionals denouncing us working against us. But in the end, the sort of pressure the FBI put on people on the reservation, particularly the old people, it just wore them down. A kind of fatigue set in. With the firefight at Aguala, and all the things that happened after that, it was easy to see we weren't going to win by direct confrontation. So the traditionals asked us to disengage to try and take some of the heaviest pressure off. And out of respect, we had no choice but to honor those wishes. And that was the end of AIM, at least in the way it had been up until then. The resistance is still there, of course, and the struggle goes on, but the movement itself kind of disappeared. While AIM's militancy was crushed beyond recognition, AIM and its legacy is still found in every single anti-colonial struggle across the world. Here in the United States and Canada, AIM still has its survival schools and legal advocacy, and they are an inspiration to current indigenous rights movements today like Standing Rock and Land Back. The true lesson to learn from this history is that no matter what capitalist forces may throw our way, the people will remain, and so will their perseverance. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This video was a way bigger project than I thought, and there is much I haven't discussed, like the Wounded Knee occupation, or Leonard Peltier's case, or anime Aquash's murder. Could be videos in of themselves, but there are already plenty of books and documentaries you can find on it if you want to learn more. But yeah, there is so much to this than I would have described, so please do yourself a favor and take a look at the works cited in the description, as there are works that are hard to put down. If you're interested in supporting indigenous movements in the US and Canada, I've also put a bunch of organizations doing incredible and dangerous work in the description, so please donate what you can. Thanks for watching, and happy Takesgiving.
Victor, sorry to hear about your dad. You need a ride?
Yeah,
Hey, Thomas. Need a ride?
you bet.
What are you gonna trade for it? We're Indians, remember? We barter.
A story?
It'll be good. Better be good.
During the 60s, Arnold Joseph was the perfect hippie because all the hippies were trying to be Indians anyway. But because of that, he was always wondering how anybody would know when an Indian was trying to make a social statement. But there's proof, you know. Back during the Vietnam War, he was demonstrating against it, and there was this photographer there. He took a picture of Arnold that day, and it made it onto the wire services and was reprinted in newspapers throughout the country. It even made it to the cover of Time magazine. In that photograph, Arnold is wearing bell-bottoms and a flowered shirt, his hair in braids with red peace symbols splashed across his face like war paint. He holds a rifle above his head, captured in that moment just before he proceeded to beat the shit out of the National Guard private lying on the ground beneath him. Another demonstrator holds a sign just barely visible over his left shoulder. It reads, "Make love, not war."
Jeez, did your dad really do that?
Thomas, you're so full of shit.